Timely debate comes as it does after the election on 5th of January, and we've heard already about the widespread concern that's been expressed by the international community and the condemnation of the shocking acts of violence and intimidation. I do want to focus mostly in my contribution on the elections, given that they are so current. As we've heard, more than half of the 300 seats were uncontested, meaning that although some candidates from other parties, some of whom I understand tried to withdraw their names from the ballot paper, but some from smaller parties were elected, but over 100 candidates from the ruling Awami League were elected unopposed. And 48 million registered voters out of 92 million could not vote. Indeed, it's reported that in Dakar, people could vote in just 2 of the 20 constituencies. It's therefore no surprise that the turnout was disappointingly low. And we've heard various, I think the official figure that is used by the government was that the turnout was about 39 to 40%. But that has been queried because, as we've heard, in many parts of the country, there was no turnout at all because the seats were uncontested. So there was an issue with participation, but there was also an issue with, on election day and the weeks preceding it, saw deplorable acts of violence. There were arson attacks on polling stations, including more than 120 schools, reports of an election officer beaten to death on polling day, and 440 polling stations reportedly closing early due to security concerns. And Human Rights Watch reported that 120 people lost their lives in pre-election violence, and at least 18 people died on election day, and there have been media reports that many were shot by police. The reasons for the violence and for the failure of the elections to proceed as we would have hoped are varied and complex, as we've heard. The BNP decided to boycott the election along with several of the smaller parties in protest against the government's decision not to allow a neutral caretaker government to take charge in the run-up to the elections, which was a practice, as we've heard from the Honourable Member for St Albans and others, had been in place since the 1996 elections. And meanwhile, there was a court order preventing the Jamaat al-Islami party from participating. There were also reports that some candidates, as I'd mentioned, tried to withdraw but were prevented on doing so, or party representatives were arrested or forced to leave Bangladesh. After the BNP leader called for a march for democracy in late December, hundreds of opposition supporters were arrested and demonstrators were prevented from reaching Dakar. The reports of arbitrary arrests, indiscriminate use of force and Ms. Zaya effectively being placed under house arrest, with security forces preventing her from leaving her home, are all deeply troubling human rights violations. We believe that the EU, the US and the Commonwealth and others were right not to send election observers, given the concerns about the election arrangements and the associated violence and intimidation. And we support the remarks by the EU High Representative Cathy Ashton, condemning the violence and highlighting the particular concern that some of the attacks targeted women and children and religious and ethnic groups. Many of our international partners support her conclusion that the conditions were not met for transparent, inclusive and credible elections. It is hoped that the dialogue that everyone is calling for, the UK, the EU, the UN and the Commonwealth in particular, will enable all the people issue of protection for ILO standards within the garment industry, the hidden costs, the hidden human costs associated with high street products in the UK being able to be bought at such a low price. And I commend the TUC, amongst others, for its work with retailers and securing support for an accord to fund an independent health and
grateful to her for giving way and for the point she's made about the role of the TUC. Could she also commend War on Want for its support for the garment workers and its practical support for helping union organisation in Bangladesh, which at the end of the day is the best way of bringing about health and safety at the workplace?
I agree entirely. I did give War on Want a little name check earlier, along with Labour Behind the Label, who do some excellent work too. And I noticed with the Honourable Member the point he made about China now moving garment production to Bangladesh because it's even cheaper to produce garments there than it is in China. And how do we tackle that issue of the potential loss of, as you try to raise terms and conditions and to raise wages and living standards in a country such as Bangladesh, how do you manage to do that in such a way that you don't displace the production to a country that factories, which is much needed? The UK was a founder member of the International Labour Organisation, and given the government's professed commitment to business violence, but the fact that many people in Bangladesh feel that democracy was not served then, and what we can do to ensure that democracy is better served in future.
David Liddington.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first of all pay tribute to all those who have contributed to the debate today, to my honourable friends, the members for St Albans, Cheltenham, Bedford, Harrow East and Tiverton and Honiton, and the honourable members for Bethnal Green and Bow, Rochdale, Poplar and Limehouse, Islington North, Luton South and Bristol East. Listening to the debate, I think what has struck me has been the sense, listening to speeches of members from different political parties in the House, that members on all sides have brought to the House today a common commitment and passion, I think it's not too strong a word, for the well-being, for the future prosperity and stable democratic development of Bangladesh. And coupled with that sense of commitment, we have heard in quite a number of today's speeches a sense of real frustration, impatience, almost anger at times, at how difficult such progress has seemed to be, and especially over the events of the recent parliamentary election in Bangladesh. And my starting point is that the government believes that it is peaceful and credible elections expressing the genuine will of the voters, which are the true mark of a mature and functioning democracy. The facts are that on Sunday the 5th of January, parliamentary elections were held in Bangladesh in accordance with the Constitution, as a number of honourable members have said today, but regrettably they took place without the opposition 18-party alliance for the reasons that have been debated extensively. And as a consequence, we were left with a situation in which just over half the seats were uncontested. That denied more than 46 million out of 92 million voters any say at the ballot box, and turnout even in the contested elections was low. That is an unsatisfactory, a deeply disappointing outcome. The day after those elections, on the 6th of January, my Right Honourable Noble friend Baroness Wasi issued a public statement making those points and also condemning the acts of intimidation and unlawful political violence. It's been reported that no fewer than 500 people have lost their lives because of political violence during 2013. 21 deaths were reported on polling day, and more than 100 polling centres, many of them schools in very poor rural areas of Bangladesh, were burned down. The government is shocked and saddened by the high number of deaths, and we urge all Bangladeshi political parties to take responsibility for this situation and to look actively for solutions through dialogue and not through political harassment and violence. Madam Deputy Speaker, all of Bangladesh's political parties share a clear and unequivocal responsibility